was an accomplished singer and pianist, but he played by ear. He sang because it was something that he loved to do.
For decades, Johnny Mathis kept quiet about the enemies who tried to destroy him. The music legend they called Too Soft sold 360 million records anyway. But at 89, he's done hiding the truth. The racist threats that forced him to dodge bullets on stage, the cruel nickname Frank Sinatra gave him, and the addiction that almost ended it all. Today, we're exposing who really tried to silence the voice. Johnny Mathis was born on September 30th, 1935, in Gilmer, Texas. He was the fourth of 7 children in a family that deeply valued music. His father, Clem Mathis, had been a vaudeville musician for a time, playing piano and singing on stage. This musical background had a lasting impact on Johnny. When Johnny was 8, his father saved $25 to buy an upright piano, a significant investment at the time. The piano was too large to fit through the front door of their small San Francisco apartment, so Clem took it apart overnight and rebuilt it inside. That kind of dedication showed how much he believed in his son's potential. Not long after Johnny was born, his family moved to San Francisco and settled in the Fillmore district. The neighborhood was alive with music and culture, often called the Harlem of the West. Growing up in that environment shaped his love for singing. By the time he was 8, he was performing at church, school events, and family gatherings. His father became his first teacher, showing him how to sing My Blue Heaven. His parents believed in him so much that they even started a small fan club for him while he was still young. When Johnny turned 13, he started formal voice lessons with Connie, a well-known vocal coach in the Bay Area. The family couldn't afford traditional lessons, so Johnny worked around her home in exchange for training. For 6 years, he learned everything from vocal scales to classical techniques, skills that would later shape his smooth tenor voice. Those years of training built the foundation for his future as one of America's most celebrated singers. Though music was his passion, Johnny was also an exceptional athlete. At George Washington High School, he was a standout in basketball and track and field. When he went to San Francisco State University on an athletic scholarship, he set a high jump record of 6 feet 5.5 inches, just 2 inches short of the Olympic record at the time. He was widely recognized as one of the best all-around athletes from the Bay Area. While in college, Johnny started performing in local nightclubs. One day, during a Sunday jam session at the Black Hawk, something life-changing happened. Helen Noga, the club's co-owner, heard him sing and was immediately drawn to his voice. She saw his potential and became his manager. In 1955, she arranged for Columbia Records executive George Avakian to hear Johnny perform at Andy's 440 Club. Avakian was so impressed that he sent a telegram to Columbia saying, "Have found phenomenal 19-year-old boy who could go all the way. Send blank contracts." Later that year, Johnny signed his first recording contract with Columbia Records at just 19 years old. His debut album, Johnny Mathis, A New Sound in Popular Song, came out in 1956. The album featured jazz-inspired arrangements by Gil Evans and Teo Macaro, highlighting Mathis' smooth vocal style. But jazz records weren't selling well at the time, and the album struggled commercially. It included songs like Easy to Love and Prelude to a Kiss, but it never made it onto Billboard's best-selling pop albums list, which had only 15 spots back then. When the album failed to make an impact, Columbia realized they needed a new approach. That moment became a turning point. Under the guidance of Mitch Miller, a key figure at Columbia Records, Mathis moved away from jazz and embraced romantic pop ballads. His debut album might not have been a hit, but it proved he had something special. His voice had warmth, control, and an emotional depth that set him apart. In late 1956, Miller took full creative control and rebranded Mathis as a balladeer. At a recording session that fall, Mathis recorded 2 songs that would change his career: Wonderful, Wonderful, and It's Not For Me To Say. When released in early 1957, Wonderful, Wonderful climbed to number 14 on the Billboard charts, while It's Not For Me To Say went even higher, reaching number 5. Both songs showcased Mathis's effortless tenor and lush orchestral arrangements, making him stand out during a time when rock and roll was taking over. Then came Chances Are. Released in mid-1957, this dreamy ballad became Mathis's first #1 hit and remains one of his most beloved songs. Written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman, it captured his ability to express deep emotion through subtle vocal nuances. By the end of 1957, he had 3 top 10 singles, proving that Miller's vision had paid off. Romantic ballads became his signature sound, appealing to fans across generations despite the dominance of rock stars like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry. A major breakthrough came on June 16, 1957, when Mathis performed on The Ed Sullivan Show. At just 21 years old, he sang in front of millions of viewers, turning him into a national celebrity overnight. The show was one of the biggest platforms for any entertainer at the time, and appearing on it meant instant success. Mathis performed some of his recent hits, including It's Not For Me To Say and Wonderful. Wonderful. The exposure sent his records soaring on the charts. Shortly after, Chances Are became a massive hit, reaching #1 and solidifying his place in American pop music. Critics praised Mathis for his velvety voice and polished stage presence. Unlike the high-energy performances of rock stars, his understated elegance connected with audiences who wanted something more romantic and timeless. His smooth delivery, combined with sweeping orchestral arrangements, made his music feel cinematic. That connection to film soon became real when MGM Studios invited him to sing It's Not For Me To Say for the 1957 movie Lizzie. Later, he performed A Certain Smile for another film soundtrack, expanding his reach beyond the music industry. In 1958, Johnny Mathis changed music history with Johnny's Greatest Hits. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was the first album ever marketed as a Greatest Hits compilation. Before that, record labels didn't release albums this way, but Columbia Records' Mitch Miller had a bold idea. Mathis was touring and couldn't record new music, so Miller gathered his biggest songs, including Chances Are, Wonderful, Wonderful, and It's Not For Me To Say. The result was a groundbreaking album that spent 490 weeks on the Billboard best-selling pop LPs chart, nearly 10 years. That record, held until The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, overtook it in 1983. The album's success didn't just make history, it set a new trend. Soon, other artists followed, including Elvis Presley with Elvis's Golden Records, and later the Eagles with their Greatest Hits, 1971 to 1975. The idea of a Greatest Hits album became standard in the industry, proving how influential Mathis's compilation was. It sold over 1 million copies by 1999 and remains a testament to his lasting appeal. Later that same year, Mathis released Merry Christmas, an album that became a holiday classic. His warm, smooth vocals, combined with Percy Faith's rich orchestral arrangements, made it one of the most beloved Christmas albums of all time. Songs like Silent Night, White Christmas, and Winter Wonderland became holiday staples. The album charted high upon release and returned to the Billboard charts every holiday season for years. By 2013, it had sold over 5 million copies, earning multi-platinum status. Mathis didn't just record holiday songs, he became the voice of Christmas itself. Even today, when December rolls around, his versions of Sleigh Ride and Silver Bells fill the airwaves, keeping his legacy alive. Among his signature hits, It's Not For Me to Say stands out as an early breakthrough. The song, featured in the 1957 film Lizzie, reached number 5 on the Billboard Top 100 and became a romantic favorite. Decades later, it found new life in films like Goodfellas and Zodiac, introducing Mathis's music to younger generations. Then came Misty, the song that would define his career. Originally an instrumental by jazz pianist Errol Garner, it became something more when Mathis recorded a vocal version in 1959. With lyrics by Johnny Burke and a heartfelt performance, the song reached number 12 on the U.S. pop singles chart. It was more than just a hit. It became a classic. Even Garner himself attended the recording session, a personal stamp of approval for Mathis's interpretation. The song's unique fade-in effect, where Mathis walked toward the microphone as he sang, gave it an emotional depth that made it unforgettable. Both Mathis's and Garner's versions were later inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, cementing Misty as one of the greatest songs of all time. Johnny Mathis built his career in a time when racial barriers were everywhere, especially in the music industry. As a black singer in the 1950s, he faced discrimination that went far beyond unfair treatment. It put his life at risk. One terrifying moment came when he was warned before a performance in the South that someone planned to shoot him if he stepped on stage. Instead of backing down, Mathis went on with the show. He performed his hit song, Chances Are, while constantly moving on stage, making himself a harder target. It was a chilling reality that black artists faced, even those as successful as him. Beyond the immediate dangers, Mathis also dealt with segregation in nearly every aspect of touring. He often wasn't allowed to stay in the same hotels as his white bandmates or audience members. This was especially common in the South and places like Las Vegas, which had a reputation for strict racial divisions. In Vegas, even after headlining major venues, he was forced to stay on the west side of town, the designated area for black performers and residents. It didn't matter how much money black entertainers brought to the casinos, they were still treated as second-class citizens. Mathis once described these experiences as feeling like watching a sad movie. He witnessed the injustice, but couldn't change it overnight. Still, his success, along with other black performers like Sammy Davis Jr., pushed things forward. By 1960, their presence and the financial power they brought forced hotel owners to reconsider their policies. Desegregation on the Las Vegas Strip wasn't the result of one dramatic protest. It was a slow shift, brought on by people like Mathis, simply showing up, performing, and refusing to be pushed aside. The racism Mathis encountered shaped his perspective on equality, but he didn't let it define him. Raised in San Francisco, he had grown up in a more diverse environment and wasn't fully exposed to deep-seated racism until he started touring. Instead of responding with anger, he followed the advice of his parents, who told him to stay focused on his goals rather than dwell on injustice. He chose to resist in his own way, by continuing to perform, by refusing to let threats stop him, and by proving that talent couldn't be confined by segregation. Johnny Mathis's split from his longtime managers, Helen and John Noga, in 1964 was more than just a business decision. It was a messy, emotional turning point that reshaped his career and forced him to take control of his own future. The Nogas had discovered Mathis, built his career from the ground up, and, at one point, were like family to him. But by the early 1960s, cracks started to show. Helen Noga had been the driving force behind Mathis's rise to fame. She secured his first big contract with Columbia Records, helped him land hits like Chances Are and Misty, and even sold her jazz club, the Black Hawk, so she and her husband could focus entirely on managing him. Mathis even lived with the Nogas for a time, highlighting just how deeply intertwined their professional and personal lives were. But success didn't come without complications. Despite being one of the highest-paid entertainers of the era, Mathis realized his finances weren't growing the way they should have been. Between January 1961 and June 1964, his net worth had reportedly increased by less than $25,000. For an artist selling millions of records, this was alarming. Mathis suspected mismanagement, excessive commissions, and unnecessary expenses. Tensions reached a breaking point in October 1964 when he took the Nogas to court, seeking to void his contract. Helen Noga didn't back down. She countersued, arguing that Mathis owed his success to her efforts. The legal battle became public and bitter, permanently damaging what had once been a strong partnership. The breakup wasn't just about money. Mathis wanted control. On his 29th birthday, September 30th, 1964, he made a bold move by founding Rojan Productions, a company that would oversee his concerts, TV appearances, and promotional work. 3 years later, he launched John Matt Records to produce his own music. This was a rare step for an artist in the 1960s, a time when record labels and managers held most of the power. But Mathis was determined to build something that was truly his. With new management under Ray Hahn, Mathis found stability. Hahn remained by his side until his death in 1984, after which Mathis took full control of his business affairs. But the split from the Nogas had taken a toll. The stress of the lawsuit, combined with a relentless touring schedule, left him physically and emotionally drained. He struggled with addiction to sleeping pills, but eventually overcame it. Even as rock and roll exploded in popularity, with acts like the Beatles dominating the charts, Mathis proved his versatility. Instead of fading into the background, he adapted. Albums like Ole, 1965, which featured songs in Spanish and Portuguese, showcased his ability to evolve with the changing music industry. Johnny Mathis is known for his smooth voice and timeless hits, but behind the scenes, he fought personal battles that nearly derailed his career. His struggles with addiction started in the early 1960s when he was introduced to Dr. Max Jacobson, a physician with a reputation for treating celebrities with so-called vitamin shots. These injections were laced with amphetamines. At first, they seemed like a miracle. Mathis had been dealing with laryngitis, and suddenly, his voice was back. He could perform night after night, sometimes 5 shows in a single evening at venues like the Copacabana in New York. But the energy boost came at a cost. The drugs took a toll on his health, and before he knew it, he was dependent. Alcohol became another problem. Champagne, in particular, was his drink of choice. At first, it seemed harmless, something to celebrate success. But over time, it became clear that the combination of alcohol and prescription drugs was taking over his life. By the 1980s, he realized these habits weren't just distractions. They were threatening everything he had built. He knew he had to make a change. A turning point came thanks to a friend who happened to be First Lady Nancy Reagan. She noticed his drinking at a reception and didn't hesitate to speak up. She suggested he had a problem and took action, arranging for him to enter the Havre de Grace Rehabilitation Center in Maryland. The facility, run by Jesuit priests, focused on more than just detoxing. They helped Mathis understand why he had turned to drugs and alcohol in the first place. It was a life-changing experience. Later, he would call it the greatest thing that ever happened to him. Reagan's intervention wasn't just a personal favor. She was deeply involved in anti-drug efforts through her Just Say No campaign, and her support showed how powerful personal connections can be in the fight against addiction. But recovery wasn't just about professional help. Mathis leaned on his faith and family to get through it. Growing up in San Francisco, his parents had taught him resilience, and now those lessons proved invaluable. His family stood by him when he needed them most, offering love and understanding rather than judgment. Through it all, Mathis never let go of his passion for music. Even in his darkest moments, he kept recording and performing, creating some of the most memorable songs of his era. Hits like Misty and Chances Are cemented his status as one of the best-selling artists of all time. After getting sober, he returned to the stage with a new sense of clarity and purpose. Johnny Mathis never intended to make headlines for anything other than his music, but in 1982, a single offhand comment changed everything. During what he believed was an off-the-record conversation with Us Weekly, he casually admitted, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." It was a simple statement, but at the time, it was a dangerous one. The early 1980s were not a welcoming era for LGBTQ+ public figures, especially in the United States. Social conservatism was at a peak, and homosexuality was still considered taboo in many circles. When Mathis's comment was published, the backlash was swift and brutal. Fans from conservative parts of the country reacted with outrage, and some even sent death threats. The hostility was so intense that Mathis immediately pulled back from discussing his personal life. He stopped addressing the topic altogether, not out of shame, but for his own safety. Despite the controversy, Mathis refused to let it derail his career. He focused on what he had always done best, his music. He continued recording, performing, and maintaining the smooth, romantic sound that had made him famous. While other artists might have used their platform to fight back or become activists, Mathis chose a different path. He let his talent speak for itself, believing that his artistry should define him rather than his private life. For decades, he avoided talking about his sexuality in public. Then, in 2017, times had changed. The world had grown more accepting, and Mathis finally felt comfortable enough to speak openly again. In an interview with CBS News, he reaffirmed what he had said all those years ago. But this time, the reaction was different. Instead of backlash, there was support. Society had evolved, and Mathis could finally acknowledge his truth without fear of losing everything. Through it all, his fans had never truly abandoned him. Even during the most difficult years, many stood by his side, drawn to his voice, his warmth, and his quiet dignity. Within the LGBTQ+ community, Mathis became an unintentional symbol of resilience, a man who had survived an era of intolerance and come out on the other side still standing. Johnny Mathis saw a major comeback in the late 1970s, thanks to a duet that took the music world by storm. Too Much, Too Little, Too Late, recorded with Denise Williams in 1978, became a chart-topping hit. It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Adult Contemporary, and R&B charts, marking his first U.S. #1 single since Chances Are in 1957. That's a gap of more than 2 decades. The song also found success overseas, hitting #3 in the UK and #9 in Canada. It wasn't just popular, it was a commercial powerhouse, earning gold certification in the US and silver in the UK. This success led to more collaborations with Williams. Later that year, they released a full album of duets, That's What Friends Are For, which climbed to #19 on the Billboard album charts and went gold in both the US and UK. Mathis used this momentum to record duets with other legendary artists like Dionne Warwick, Natalie Cole, and Gladys Knight. While disco and rock dominated the airwaves, he managed to stay relevant by blending contemporary sounds with his signature romantic style. Adapting was key to his longevity. He had started as a smooth ballad singer in the 1950s, but over time, his music evolved to include jazz, soul, disco, soft rock, and even country. In 1979, his album Mathis Magic featured disco influences, while Let It Be Me, Mathis in Nashville, 2010, showcased his take on country music. Decades into his career, he was still finding new ways to connect with audiences. In 2017, Johnny Mathis Sings the Great New American Songbook featured covers of modern hits from artists like Adele and Pharrell Williams, proving that his voice could bring warmth to any era of music. Even as the music industry shifted toward digital platforms, Mathis remained relevant. He continued releasing new material, reissuing classics, and celebrating his extensive catalog. In 2017, he released a massive 68-disc box set, The Voice of Romance, the Columbia Original Album Collection, which introduced his work to a new generation. His music also found a home in pop culture. One of the most memorable uses of his songs came in The X-Files. In the 1996 episode Home, the eerie contrast between his soothing voice and the episode's disturbing content left a lasting impact. Mathis, however, was uncomfortable with the violent nature of the scene and declined permission for his original recording to be used, leading the show to create a cover version instead. His music also appeared in Mad Men, further cementing his status as a timeless icon. Johnny Mathis's appeal has lasted for nearly 7 decades, and it's easy to see why. His warm tenor voice, effortless phrasing, and ability to connect emotionally with listeners have made him one of the best-selling artists of all time, with over 360 million records sold worldwide. Mathis's impact wasn't limited to individual songs. In 2003, he received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, a recognition of his decades of influence. His recordings weren't just popular, they were considered historically and culturally significant. The Library of Congress acknowledged this in 2024 when it added Chances Are to the National Recording Registry, ensuring that future generations would hear what made Mathis a legend. Meanwhile, Frank Sinatra was never one to hold back his opinions, and when it came to Johnny Mathis, his early comments were far from kind. He reportedly called Mathis the African Queen and dismissed his music with a crude remark, "He sings good, but who wants to listen to that shit?" Sinatra's style was built on sophisticated phrasing and storytelling, while Mathis leaned into romantic ballads with a silky, smooth delivery. To Sinatra, this approach felt too soft, too sentimental. But time has a way of changing perspectives. As Mathis's success grew, so did the respect he commanded. Sinatra eventually admitted that Mathis had one of the most distinctive voices in the world, even referring to him as the master song salesman. Bing Crosby echoed the same sentiment, and Johnny Carson went even further, calling Mathis the best ballad singer in the world. These weren't just empty compliments. They were acknowledgments from some of the biggest names in entertainment, people who understood the weight of lasting success. Mathis never fired back at Sinatra's early remarks. Instead, he carried himself with grace, never speaking ill of the legendary crooner. That quiet dignity only added to his reputation. Over 6 decades, Mathis sold over 100 million records worldwide, becoming the voice behind classics like Misty and Chances Are. His career proved that talent and consistency outlast even the harshest criticism. Critics were another obstacle Mathis had to overcome. In the 1950s, Jazz purists dismissed his ballads as overly sentimental. They called his music elevator music, a label meant to diminish its artistic value. Jazz was all about improvisation and technical mastery, and to them, Mathis's smooth, polished sound felt too commercial. Even Errol Garner, the jazz pianist who composed Misty, wasn't thrilled with Mathis's version. He thought it was too refined, leaning too much into pop. But audiences didn't care. Mathis's rendition of Misty became a massive hit, reaching number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earning him his first Grammy nomination. Over time, the song became so associated with him that it's now considered his signature track. Mathis never let the criticism shake him. He wasn't interested in labels or fitting into a particular genre. He once said, "I didn't care about labels. I just wanted to sing beautiful songs." That mindset allowed him to build a career that transcended musical trends. While critics debated the artistic merit of his style, audiences embraced it completely. His albums consistently went gold or platinum, and Johnny's Greatest Hits, 1958, even pioneered the concept of the Greatest Hits album. In the end, Mathis didn't just survive the skepticism, he outlasted it. His music endured, his influence remained, and his voice became a part of pop culture history. Even the critics who once dismissed him had to acknowledge the truth. Johnny Mathis wasn't just a ballad singer, he was a legend,